Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large. Coming at you for show 100 and something or other. We're just rolling them out here. And this week I am joined by Robert Örell. And he is the director of Exit Sweden and the co-chair of the Radicalisation Awareness Network, Exit Group of the European Commission. And the Radicalisation Awareness Network, sometimes referred to as RAN. Or RAN. And so welcome, Robert. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, I'm very, very, very happy to have you on board here to talk about some of this stuff because you're involved in a very interesting, I think, a very interesting group doing very good things. And so first off, why don't we go ahead and talk about that? What is this? What is Exit? Because that's actually the name of a group. It's not just a verb here. And what is the Radicalisation Network, and how does it work? What are these things?
So, well, Exit is an NGO in Sweden with the aim of helping people to disengage, to leave the Swedish white power environment or movement. So people who are active and want to make a change in their life and leave. So that's really Exit. We work primarily with people who are motivated to make this change and leave. We support families and parents, and we do quite a lot of trainings and consultations for professionals.
Excellent, excellent. And it's an NGO. That's a non-government organization. So you're a private group then?
Yep.
Excellent.
We're part of a larger youth center called Fryshuset, which heads Exit. But indeed, it's a non-governmental organization, which is also key in terms of reaching the target group. They're very often hostile towards society and government representation. So being an NGO is what we can see a key factor in this work.
Okay, got it. And how do you guys like what is it that this group, your work on exit counseling or helping people who are coming out of these groups, how do you find them? How do they find you? What is this? How's the network actually work on the ground?
So we work with people who are motivated to make a change, and we've been around for almost years. So the movement that we target, they very well know about us and our work. And we work with people who reach out to say that they want to have some type of contact or dialogue. Sometimes they're very, very clear with the decision. They want to make a change. And other times it may be that they want to know a little bit more about us and what we could do. So we reach people primarily through them contacting us. But it can also be that these individuals already are in touch with professionals like prison probation, social workers, or school, police, and they reach out to us through them.
Interesting. So it's not, you guys are not people who stage interventions or try to go and grab somebody out of these groups who don't want to, who want to stay there. You're not trying to, do that. You're helping people who are reaching out for help.
Yeah, indeed. And I think this is a little bit responding to the nature of these groups. They very seldom want contact or want to be engaged with groups that's not part of their own environment. And motivating people to leave takes some time. And being in touch with people who are active in these groups and motivating them to leave, it can be quite challenging. So we work with people who are already motivated and want to make this change.
Right. Do you ever get contacted by family or friends of people who are in these groups to get advice or direction on what to do?
Indeed. That's a large part of the work as well. A lot of people who have family members or friends or loved ones who are engaged in the white power environment very seldom support that type of engagement. And when individuals engage in these groups, for families, it's often very difficult to understand what's happening. I can't reach my son or daughter or sibling anymore. There's a change in attitudes in our relations, and quite often what was described to us from family members is that the individuals joining these groups get much more aggressive and quite difficult to reach. Everything they want to talk about is related to the movement and their cause that they're involved in now.
Right. It's quite transforming to a person's personality to become part of one of these radicalized groups. Do you only deal with the groups that are involved with white supremacy in Sweden, or do you find yourself working with other destructive cult groups or radicalization type groups as well?
So the aim of our organization, it's really, the aim of Exit is really to help people to leave the white power environments, the neo-Nazi groups. But we met people from all types of environments, violent left-wing, violent religious motivated groups, criminal gangs, hooligans, cults. So we met people from all different environments throughout the years, and decided in 2010 to expand to an organization called PASUS that helps people to leave organized criminal gangs, working with the experience and method of Exit, but targeting criminal individuals wanting to leave criminal gangs. And we also work with a handful of cases from other radicalized environments, and we done family support for families whose children were planning on or already went to Syria to join IS or Daesh.
Right. Yeah, I can see how there's crossover. And in fact, you had even sent me a paper where you discuss having worked with the International Cultic Studies Association, because there is a lot of crossover, and I can't imagine that there isn't. I mean, this is how I found you, was I work with, and in the anti-cult field, I guess you could say, I mean, from my experience with Scientology, I have become very interested in thought reform and extremism and the radicalization that occurs in these groups, and then that led me right to you. So these, a lot of crossover there. Do you how big of an issue or problem is the neo-Nazis or white supremacists in Sweden specifically?
Mm-hmm. Well, according to the security service who monitors these groups, they talk about roughly a few thousand individuals who are engaged in these groups, which is not a number that it doesn't seem like it's a threat to democracy. But since they're very violent and they promote violence against their enemies or individuals that they perceive as enemies, there's quite a lot of violent acts made from these groups, and every now and then in cycles we have smaller groups and form smaller cells. I think we can call it quite clearly inspired by the American group, the Order, or the Silent Brotherhood, that in the beginning mid-1980s formed a small cell, started to rob banks, to bunk up with weapons, to be prepared when the revolution would come. And these groups would be inspired by the same type of ideas and break out and try to start.
Right. So okay. So yeah, it really is in a way kind of it's just a criminal enterprise.
I think it's really a tactic, a strategy. So these groups have primarily two ways. One is to win the will of the people and to get elected, just like Hitler in Germany before the Second World War. But today it's quite difficult to get a lot of support for ideas of white power and neo-Nazism. So a lot of the groups took up on this second strategy, which developed in the 60s, 70s, and primarily 80s, where smaller groups formed these type of cells and wanted instead to start a revolution. Yeah.
Right. What sort of thing, I imagine it's quite an education for you guys doing the exit counseling and work that you do in getting people out of these groups to find out what is it that attracts them to such a thing in the first place. I mean, we can look at neo-Nazis or white supremacists here in the United States or over there and just go, well, they're crazy, well, they're just nuts. And I'm certainly willing to say that. I mean, I think somebody who's, preaching violence toward what they think is some inferior racial group or something like that, I think that is insane. But people aren't born neo-Nazis. I mean, they're, like, what's the process? How have you found this to occur, that these guys get into these groups and get so deeply involved that they're willing to commit robbery and murder?
I think it's really a process of getting engaged in these groups. I haven't met many 14 years old who read Mein Kampf and thought about the ideology and thought that this might be something for me. But much more often it's built on social bonds. You get to know somebody who's involved in these groups, and you become radicalized and recruited. But there's also a lot of underlying mechanism that can motivate people to join these groups. Experience of conflicts, or being a victim of crimes or traumas or family troubles, that really motivates you to seek a group where you have a very strong sense of belonging, you have a strong sense of purpose and direction and goal, and you're also it's also very available for you to handle your disappointments or shame or fear by challenging it into aggression and pointing it towards others. So it's quite powerful mechanisms that influence people to join these groups and influence people in these environments. So I think you have to have this understanding when you think of individuals in these groups. I think for the same reason, when a lot of people think about religious cults, the perception in society is quite similar. How can you join these groups? Why do you join a gang? Why do you join an armed group or whatever type of environment it is? So you really have to think about what's the need of the individual, and what does these environments offer that individual? I think that makes more sense to figure it.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Do you find any common denominator between the various people that you've run across, in doing exit counseling or doing work with these guys, as to, is there a type of person who goes towards these groups, or is it multivariate and you really can't predict who would become part of this kind of group and then become radicalized?
From what we can see, it's really multivariate. So there's a lot of different individuals with a lot of different backgrounds and experience joining these groups. You can look at, for example, individuals coming from very stable homes with high educated parents, to individuals coming from very broken home where a lot of challenges in the family, even domestic violence. So a very great range of differences. Also with school experiences or friendships or bullying or being victim of crimes, it can really differ. But most often there's some type of experience that creates the need for these environments, where you have a sense of, you feel the need of revenge, or building a strong identity and showing other people who you are. So I think this would probably be the commanding factor. A lot of the individuals are victims of crimes or bullying or different polarized group environments, where it's easier to go into these type of environments. But it can really differ. We see a lot of different ways into this movement and experience before you join the groups.
It's interesting to me, and I'm glad that I suspected what you just said was the answer, but I wasn't sure. But it makes a lot of sense to me, because people are people, and our emotion-based reasoning and thinking is what drives us. And whether you have a lot of money or whether you have no money, a situation or a circumstance can occur that will cause you to become upset, and it doesn't matter your lifestyle or where you're from or what part of the country you're in or what part of the world you're in. If something sets you off, it sets you off. And being set off is not dependent on your socioeconomic status, so it makes sense to me that you could have people come from, upper class, middle class, and lower classes going into these groups, and for whatever their own individual reasons, like you said, they feel the need for a revenge or getting back at, because they somehow have felt persecuted or marginalized in some fashion, and that this is the solution to that problem. Unfortunately, it's not a very good solution. Yeah, for sure. How did you personally end up in this line of work? I mean, this is pretty specialized, right? I mean, everybody on my channel knows how I got into this. I mean, I was, used to be in Scientology, and now I'm like, hello. What was your path to this, and what motivated you to do it?
So if we look at Exit, we have really two types of competences, and one is professionally trained therapists or social workers or similar type of background, and the other group of colleagues is what we call formers, people with own experience from leaving the white power group or criminal gangs, depending on Exit or Passos. And this is also my experience, that I was active for quite a few years during my late teens, and was involved in the Swedish white power groups. And I decided to disengage, and this was in the early history of Exit, and I didn't really know about Exit until I started to make a change of mind. And I got in touch with Exit as well, and left that way. So that's how I got involved in Exit. And later on, I started to work for Exit. This is my second round where I'm working here.
Yeah. Excellent. May I ask, this is personal, so if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But I'm curious, what was what got you? We were just talking about how there's some event or series of events that will occur that will, get a person to. I feel like I need to do this because this is the solution to my problems. What happened to you?
I think there was a lot of different factors that motivated me to finally join this type of environment. I think one major factor was that I had some difficulties in school. I needed glasses, and it wasn't really noticed until 9th grade. So it was 9 years of quite a lot of challenges in school. That also led to quite a low self-esteem and quite a lot of frustration that I needed to challenge or channel different ways. So I think this is one of the main reasons why I at all started to look at other type of groups or building that type of identity outside of the normal, that my friends had. So I started to look at different groups. I went into black metal and death metal scene, and I had dark clothes, and I had upside down crosses on my jacket, and listened to very aggressive and angry music, which really mirrored, I think, my emotional state. I was very angry and very upset, and just couldn't really understand, I think, what happened, and could definitely not word it as a child and grip it. But this music and this environment really helped to challenge, oh my God, this is a difficult word, to channel all these difficult emotions. So I think I went in through there, and after a couple of years, I ended up in the football supporter environment, which was a little bit more aggressive and violent, quite masculine. So I ended up there and hanged around there for a few years, and through there I met with people who were involved in white power groups. And I think the difference from the previous environments to the white power group was it connected very strong on an emotional level on the self-esteem. So really having the message that, Robert, you're not a failure. It's not your fault. You're actually superior.
Right.
And by joining us in our group, we will help you reach those goals, and we help you to channel to direct all your anger towards the enemies and give answers to all these difficult questions.
That makes a lot of sense. Would you say that your experience, in light of what you've learned since, coming out, becoming part of Exit, doing the work that you do, would you say that your experience was typical, or was your experience in getting into that situation and coming out of it, would you say that was unusual or a fairly typical example?
I think there's quite a lot of elements in my story that other people relate to, and going from different groups or searching for this very strong community of belonging, directing your energy and your aggression or difficult emotions. I think this is very similar to a lot of what I hear from other people and other individuals. You wouldn't really join this type of groups if everything is good at home, you're successful in school, you have great friends, you've never been victim of crime, you have a partner or whatever. If all of these things is in place, there's really no need to join the violent extremist groups.
Right. I agree completely. And another aspect of that is also the length of time. The process is a gradual process. And I think people have a misunderstanding that it's a black and white, one day you're fine and the next day you're crazy. It's a progression, and it's a very gradual progression. It's not a one incident sets you off and suddenly you want to go blow up the world, It's a point I like to make because in my own experience, I have a lot of people who watch my channel and or are Scientology watchers specifically, and they constantly are asking, how is it possible that somebody could be so stupid as to fall for such utter nonsense? And I can't imagine that the reaction in your world is a whole lot different. How can somebody possibly you fall for Hitler? I mean, come on, how could somebody possibly be so stupid? But when you understand that it's a gradual, slow evolution that often I think would take years to get a person into that way of thinking, it starts making a bit more sense, even if it is a little harder to get the nuances of it,
Indeed. And thinking process is one way, which is, I think, helpful, but also that it's not really intellectual logic decisions that makes people to join either Scientology or white power groups or the other emotions, a sense of belonging, purpose, these more type of factors.
Yes. Yeah, the emotion, the appeal to emotion, the appeal to authority. These are the two logical fallacies I always point to as the main underlying things that get people involved in these groups is there's a very powerful emotional appeal. It doesn't appeal to everybody. So not everybody responds, and some people look at it and go, yeah, that's crazy. But for some other people, that emotional draw it's like a magnet. I mean, it just draws you right in. And it takes some empathy and some compassion to see the path, and how it works.
Yeah, and I think you have to also understand that it's about timing. When are people open and willing to join these groups, and also a lot about the social relations. Who is it that I meet? What type of impression do I get from that individual? What type of relation do we grow from that? So there's a lot of factors that would influence when people join these groups.
Exactly. Okay, now how big? Okay, so we talked about numbers in Sweden of white supremacists. Looking broader, looking across Europe, looking across the world, from the experience you've had, you've been very concentrated on Europe, of course. So I can't expect you to talk numbers about the United States or something. But I'm just kind of curious from the experience that you've had over the last few years, how big of a problem do you perceive this to be? The radicalized groups and people becoming part of these groups? Do you think that this is a rising problem, that more people are getting involved in these groups, or do you see from your experience that it's becoming less or staying the same, or how would you talk about that?
So from the development that we can see right now, it really seems like it's a growing issue.
While what you do is very specialized work, do you have any advice for family or friends of people who get involved with, white power groups or extremist groups of any kind?
So indeed, the work that we do is quite specialized and really targeted towards helping people to leave these environments. But lessons really show that some of the key elements when it comes to disengagement, exit work, or parental support is to provide an understanding of what does it mean when individuals engage in these groups. How can you understand radicalization and the influence from these environments? Because this also gives you a different feeling of how you can communicate and what you can do to at least not escalate the situation. So my advice would really be to get more understanding and awareness on what does it mean for individuals to join violent extremist groups, how does the radicalization process influence the individual's relation to other people, way of thinking, way of handling emotions and relations, because this will help in creating more non-confrontational settings. One of the challenges is that family members and professionals and people who are around these environments go into the conflict that violent extremists seek. And going into conflict won't really help to make a change or make the situation better, but most often just escalates it.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, I have had people in the family and friends of Scientologists say the exact same thing. They come onto my channel and we talk about how, the last thing you should be doing, with somebody who gets involved in these groups is antagonizing them or being, or getting into shouting, screaming, arguing matches with them about the validity of what they're doing. And instead, what you really want to do is somehow, through compassion and understanding, get down to the root cause of why this person is interested in this sort of thing in the first place.
Indeed. These groups are very good at isolating individuals from former members, from family, from society at large. So we don't want to help this isolation, but we want to break it by keeping bonds, by keeping relations, and not pushing people further out.
Exactly, and it's tragic how the natural reaction of many people to these groups or to individuals in these groups actually feeds the person's desire to stay in the group.
Yep.
And you have to really fight that natural urge to just, punch the guy. In America, there's a real thing about punch a Nazi. I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know if this is in Europe or not, but it's big here. There's a whole section of the left wing of liberal thinking that gets into this very strange thing of the way to deal with Nazis is to go beat them up. And
sure.
And you're not helping anybody when you do that.
No, indeed, we see this in Europe as well, and Sweden definitely. And I mean, once again, the problem is that you put yourself in the game of the circle of escalation and polarization. You only feed the extremist perception that we got to fight the enemies. They're against us. They're wrong. We're right. We have to really fight them very strong. I think one of my acquaintances from the U.S., Frankie, said in one interview that, a stone in the head will never get a violent extremist or neo-Nazi in a rally to stop and think like, oh, am I really doing the right thing now or not? I think this is really puts the finger on it, that violence and aggression and these type of measures really just feeds and push people further into these groups. It really strengthens.
Exactly. And unfortunately, these groups want those kind of responses. They want people to fight them and antagonize them and continue to give them a reason for them to be violent. you know. So it really feeds into their whole game to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't think that people here really, I don't think the kind of people who are talking about punching Nazis really understand that. I think they feel helpless in the face of such extremism. They don't understand why somebody would do that, why somebody could feel that way or adopt that kind of belief system. And so in their own frustration feel, well, I have to fight this, and the only way I know how to is to go punch them. And so that's what I'm going to do because it feels good. You know,
indeed.
You know,
it's definitely a frustrated response to want to hit somebody else or to try to stop them with violence, and we know from the experience and listening to a lot of formers and people who actually left these groups that these situations, the demonstrations, the violence, the riots, that really only triggers the sense of belonging, of the rightfulness of the cause, that we're on the right path, and look at all these enemies we have. We really have to fight them even stronger.
That's right. That's right. And it seems counterintuitive. It seems like it doesn't make sense when you're in that frame of mind of punching a Nazi, but the fact is that when you do that, and what you're doing is you're feeding their narrative, and you are actually making them stronger when you do that. Would you agree with that?
Indeed, I would definitely support that argument that this really strengthened them. I mean, these groups, when they come home from a rally or a demonstration where there's been violence or riots, that type of event is strengthening for the group.
Right, and you would know what you're talking about with this. I mean, I really am very happy to be able to speak with you about this because it is a polarizing thing. It has and is continuing to get a lot of attention here in the United States, and I suspected that what we're talking about right now was the case, but I wanted to confirm it with you, and we have, that the violence is not the answer to dealing with these groups.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm sorry, I just wanted to make one other point on that, and then I'll have you respond. Obviously, at the point where radicalized, terrorists are jumping out of vans with machetes, killing people, obviously you're too late. That's the time that you're going to have to put the person down. But I'm talking about prior to that, way before that, you have opportunities to deal with these people in a nonviolent fashion that could affect positive change for them if you do it right. And that's, what do you think?
Of course, I think this is a very, very important point to make, that it's not about accepting or supporting, but really to think about the consequences of the counteractions. And of course, the campaign, the situation where individuals are in a demonstration is very difficult to build bond, trust, and relations on the demonstrations or riots. That's not what I'm saying, but in the individual cases where you have people around you, in family or among friends or in your workplace, my message is really not to push them further out in the extremist groups. I think that's the important distinction. So it's not about supporting extremist groups to have rallies or these type of things, but really to think about the individuals that you are able to influence in your close surroundings.
Exactly. People get into these groups one at a time. They don't go do mass recruitment, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have 20, 30, 40 people at a time being converted to these groups. It's a one-on-one thing. And so getting people out of these groups, taking these groups out, is a matter of reversing that on a one-on-one basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I see it.
And that's our experience as well, that this usually works much more efficient if you have the one-to-one work where you can support people, because they also look very different. It's very different if you're 15, 17, you've been around for 1 or 2 years, or you're 25, 30 and you're on your way up in the career, or you're 40 and serving lifetime in prison. You have quite a lot of different situations that you need to take in consideration when you develop the responses and meet people in these groups.
Exactly. I think it's also hard for people who are frustrated with these groups and frustrated with the fact that they even exist to have the patience to want to deal with this on a one-on-one basis. They're like, well, let's just blow them up and that'll solve the problem. Just take them all, just put them all in a barge and throw them out into the middle of the river and blow it up, and then no more Nazis. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
And I think the risk with that is really that we let our own mindset become too similar to theirs. So it's really about keeping an open mind, having a complex thinking, and really think about what type of things or motivations or strategies can be found around this specific individual. How can I motivate or help that person to make a change in life?
Exactly. And that's, I'm sorry, folks, but the simplistic solutions are simplistic and might seem on a short term to work, but the fact of the matter is they don't. They don't work. And if you really want to solve this kind of problem with radicalization, you have to understand it and you have to deal with it on a certain level and on certain terms, and those terms are not meeting violence with violence. Well, Robert, it has been absolutely fascinating having you on here. I really, really appreciate your time. And is there anything else about this before we wrap up here that you feel we should have covered or talk about with this that we did not cover?
We covered what I think we should have. And just to make a final remark, I think when we engage with people who are active in these groups, we need to really think about the underlying motivation to join these groups. Why did the individual join these groups from the beginning? And also, what type of actions can I do that will help the person to make a change in motivation and want to leave?
Big time. I agree completely. Well, Robert, you're doing some great work out there with this. I really appreciate the fact that you're out there doing what you're doing and that this group exists, the Radicalization Awareness Network, and this exit group, and that the European Commission is putting some real effort and intention in behind understanding these groups and trying to get people de-radicalized out of them. And I think that that is a very, very worthy cause. So, good on you.
Thank you very much, and likewise, keep it up with this great work for sharing information and knowledge and different perspectives.
Yes, I feel like I've only just begun. There's so much work to do. But really, we're really just trying to make the world a better place in our little way that we can. And I think this is, but the thing is, every person you get out of these groups is potentially saved lives.
Indeed. Absolutely.
I mean, this is not a small thing. We're not, you really got to get folks out there that every de-radicalized person is a potential suicide bomber that has been stopped. Before there was a tragedy, before you have to watch it on CNN or Fox. And so this is the kind of work that really does need to be supported. How would people contact you, Robert, or your organization?
So you can find me at the homepage of Exit. If you Google Exit Sweden, you most probably find it sooner or later, and you can contact me through Exit. There's also for the U.S. audience, there's a group called Life After Hate who are working with formers in the U.S. that might be interesting to have a look at. Just Google Life After Hate, and you can reach them as well.
Excellent. And I will put links to this in the show notes at sensiblyspeaking.com. And on YouTube here in the description section below, you will find links to Robert's group and to Life After Hate. And we will, I'm sure we will talk again. And Robert, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, so we're going to wrap up the show here. Any comments, feedback, good, bad, or sideways, go ahead and leave it in the comments section below. I will see everything that you say. And thanks for coming around. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.